And I just want to go back to this picture because obviously Jon Stewart was photoshopped out of that picture, right? There you are.
John had the greatest honor of all,
like
interviewing
Zenobia.
Hillary and Condoleezza.
As you were doing this, he was interviewing the greatest honor of all, interviewing Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice
Together, like...
I mean, I'm sure also on the other side of this car is Ben Stiller and Sean Penn. Am I wrong? I mean, where are those guys? Because Sean they could go show up and give Zelensky his Oscar, who I'm sure he had immediately melted down for the money. But where is Sean Penn? Where is Ben Stiller? Where is Jon Stewart?
Caught, probably.
None of those people are there. Isn't that so? Could go ahead, speak to that. To me, that just smacks of the phonies that they are, or are they just that easily controlled?
I think they're to varying degrees. Like, I have so many thoughts about the people, specific people, one of whom I know that you just listed. But I would just say, in general, people have a very strong internal herd instinct, and the desire to belong to a larger group and win the approval of that group is right up there with the sex instinct and the desire for food and water. I mean, it's very basic. And I do think it's like a weird anomaly of birth if you don't have that. I actually don't have that, but most people do. And so I sort of cut them a break a little bit. But in the case of Assange, like if you read, if you follow that case at all and you sort of push a tiny bit, like, well, okay, what's his crime? You know, he spent 4.5 years in the worst prison in the UK. What has he been charged with in the UK? Nothing. He has not been charged with a crime in Great Britain, period. And so why is he in jail? Well, because the U.S. government is trying to indict him, and the British government has agreed to hold him in a maximum security cell in isolation until that's resolved. Well, like, what is this? And then you find out that before he was charged with any crime in the United States, that Mike Pompeo, who is the director of the CIA, decided to kill him, to assassinate him before he'd been charged with a crime. And then you think to yourself, wait a second. Are federal appointees in my country allowed to use my tax dollars to murder people who embarrass them? I don't think they're allowed to do that. In fact, I think that's a felony. But Mike Pompeo is not in jail. In fact, he's bombing around to the same donors that, they all go to. And not just on the right. But I mean, Nikki Haley's donors, but they're also Chuck Schumer's donors. And those people are all cool with that. That our government, using our money in our name, would murder a guy because he dared to embarrass them by uncovering actual crimes that they committed. And everyone knows this, and no one has a problem with it. And none of that is speculation. It's all been proven. And Mike Pompeo was confronted with the fact that he discussed at CIA as its director murdering Julian Assange. And his response was, anybody who leaked that information is guilty of a crime because you violated our classification laws. Really? What about the guy who was discussing on public property as a public official murdering somebody using federal funds? That's not a crime? Are you freaking kidding? Like, it's too crazy for me. I can't deal with it. So once I started to learn more about that, I was like, I'm just going over there. And I love his wife. Stella is I'm sure you know her, but just really a smart and humane and just decent, good person. And it just bothered me so much that I literally and I didn't have a job. I was like, okay, I'm not doing anything. So it takes 5 hours to get there. I just flew over and went to see him. And it was worse than I imagined.
And, they did the same playbook they did to Julian Assange, they did to Russell Brand, right? So as soon as you start to tell the truth.
Oh, of course. Oh, I noticed.
So they called him a rapist. They said Julian Assange was a rapist. That's the first thing they did. And of course, it took years for that to go away. But now, the lie has power. And so people still think of him as a rapist or a creep or something like that. And and then they did it. You see him do it to Russell Brand. As soon as Russell Brand reached 6 million subscribers on YouTube and was telling the truth about everything, just like you are, they went after him with that same thing. By the way, the stuff that was not new, it wasn't women who came to the police complaining about him or even came to the newspapers complaining about him. It was the newspapers who went and had to fight. They talked to every person in his past and tried to get them to say stuff about him. And then they wrote a sensational hit piece, which is what it was, sensational. And absolutely no charges filed against Russell Brand. There's not nothing.
I know.
And and everybody, and so somehow immediately YouTube goes, well, we have to take his funding away. And so that's what YouTube did. They tried to take it. They did. They took his advertising away, although I'm sure they still run ads on it, but they just don't give any money to him.
But you know, I went to go see Russell too, who I love and know pretty well, on that same trip because I wanted to see how he was doing. And I was reminded that, by the way, none of the women, assuming they exist, who accused him were named. So media organizations hear an allegation of a crime, but they only name the accused, but not the accuser. So it's like which is totally wrong. I mean, it's completely immoral. You know, you've been accused of robbing a bank. Which bank, you ask? I'm not going to tell you. But you're a bank robber. I mean, it's like, but by the way, this is the playbook. I read this today. I'm writing a piece about Julian Assange. So in 2017, his real sin was embarrassing the CIA by revealing the existence of the surveillance program that surveilled a bunch of foreign heads of state, et cetera, et cetera. And Assange, by the way, withheld a lot of the information because he asked the CIA, look, I don't want to get anybody killed. So here's what I'm about to put on WikiLeaks. Tell me if any of it is too far. They wouldn't respond. Anyway, but the CIA found the guy they believed leaked that information to WikiLeaks, and they charged him with that crime, imperiling American national security. A jury did not convict him of that. But guess what happened next? He got busted for kiddie porn. Can you believe it? The guy who offended the CIA turned out to be like a huge kiddie porn guy. They found it all in his computer, amazingly. And he's in prison now, and he'll be there for the rest of his life. There isn't a remarkable connection between there's an overlap between the following sets: people who love kiddie porn and people who offend the regime. Have you ever noticed that? It's amazing. And it's enough almost to keep me off the internet at this point. Because I mean, they're not going to get me on, I've been married to the same girl for 30 years. I don't drink. So like, I don't know how they're going to get me. It's not going to be on that stuff. So I'm just not going to my computer. That way they can never say I'm a kiddie porn guy.
Well, they could definitely get me on that stuff. People think that Julian Assange, when I meet what I call shitlibs, my ex friends who are still Democrats, and think that by voting for a Democrat, they pat themselves on the back that they're virtuous and they're somehow fighting white supremacy, Nazism, and fascism, and they're this whole idea. I had a friend say to me, this is a direct quote. Jimmy, I'll go along with a lot of the shit you say, which actually doesn't sound like he would. But he then said, I'm sorry, but January 6th undermined our democracy. And I was like, well, that's adorable. That's what you think did it? You think January 6th is what? You don't live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy. And that was proven over 10 years ago by a Princeton study that what you think and want, no matter how many votes you vote, doesn't have any effect on legislation whatsoever. The only people that affect legislation is the top 10% of the wealthy people in this country, which makes us an oligarchy by definition. Yes. Your government was stolen by corporations probably 50 or 60 years ago, which is why workers haven't had a real raise since 1980. And when are you going to get pissed off about that? The answer is never, because the man on the television didn't tell him to get pissed off about that.
I couldn't agree more. By the way, if they can like kill your president in plain view, and then the lone gunman kills the lone gunman, and then they force you to like believe what is so clearly a lie, and then they attack you as crazy if you question it, and then you go along with it, maybe you're not ready for a democracy. I mean, at some point, people have to say, I'm a free man, I'm a citizen, I pay my taxes, I obey most of your stupid laws, and I kind of demand representation, or I'm going to get very ornery. And you see almost none of that. You don't. So I don't know. People are free when they demand freedom, and people who don't demand freedom don't get it.
I have to push back a little bit. We said we've never had a real conversation about taxes. We did have a conversation about one tax. And this is, I know, because my brother watches too much cable news. And one day out of nowhere, I'm at his house and he goes, Jimmy, we got to get rid of that estate tax. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he goes, the estate tax, that's, that's when the government takes it. By the way, my brother makes about $50,000 a year. Who said this? And he said, that's when if you die and you have millions and millions of dollars, the government just takes half of it. They just take it. I was like, well, that's horrible. Let me know when that becomes a problem and I'll organize a rally. But until then, maybe you should worry about the t-shirt tax at Walmart, because I'm pretty sure estates don't have 2 cars that don't work on the front lawn. So we did have a discussion almost nightly for a few years about the estate tax on network cable news, and that was because they wanted to cut the estate tax, and that's exactly what they did.
But it's kind of been overtaken by events, that debate. It's an interesting debate, and I agree. I would love to hear that debate. Any debate about economics is a good debate as far as I'm concerned. Any debate. And I'm very open-minded, so like convince me. But that specific debate is kind of moot now because really rich, I mean, if you've got, some family business or whatever, it's a real issue. But if you're a billionaire, it's not an issue at all because you use our nonprofit system to shield your money, right? It's all about foundations, as you noted at the outset. So I'm kind of wondering, what is the point of a, quote, nonprofit? I mean, nonprofits, if you really think about it, NGOs, whatever you call them, kind of define our country. They have more power than the Congress. I'm not sure they're working always for the public good. And they don't have to pay any taxes at all, which makes them twice as powerful as everyone else. So why do we have that system? I don't understand. How about a system where everybody pays the same tax rate, everybody, okay? Keep it low, and rich people can't get out of it. I mean, it's just a thought. And if I work at a company, you pay taxes. If I work at a church, I pay taxes. I'm pro-church. I like church, okay? But I don't see why churches shouldn't have to pay taxes. If the people who go to the church support it, that's good, right? They can tithe more. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm totally happy with that. And I just think the nonprofit thing is one of the biggest scams I've ever seen. Why does Harvard have billions and billions and billions of dollars in its endowment and it's still charging $100,000 a year to go there? So who's benefiting from this? It doesn't, not that you'd ever go to Harvard or want to, but and many colleges are this way. Why are they paying no money? I'd love to hear a debate on that.
You drive down Hollywood Boulevard and it's filled with Scientology buildings and some of the most expensive real estate in Los Angeles, and they'll not have to pay any taxes because L. Ron Hubbard is a nonprofit, so he's a religion. He's a religion somehow.
Of course. Yes, and they got that by suborning the IRS commissioner under Bill Clinton. And I'll never forget when that happened. And I ran into that guy at the TSA line in National Airport right after he made that decision to make Scientology a, quote, religion under U.S. tax law. And I did not have the balls to ask him. I stood right next to him in this TSA line. Fred Goldberg, I think his name was. And I want to say, you really gave tax-exempt status to L. Ron Hubbard? But it was one of those great moments in my life that I wasted through cowardice.